The day I signed my divorce papers, my ex-wife Victoria looked happier than she had on our wedding day. Her smile was radiant, her eyes wide with glowing anticipation for a future that no longer included me. She practically skipped out of the courthouse, already tapping away on her phone before she even reached the parking lot. I stood on the concrete steps in my wrinkled suit, the exact same one I had worn to 6 grueling months of court-mandated mediation, and watched the woman I had loved for 8 years disappear from my life without a single backward glance. She walked away with our suburban house, my late grandmother's inheritance, the car I was still making monthly payments on, and nearly all of our joint savings account. I walked away with a cramped studio apartment above a noisy laundromat and a brutal wake-up call that would alter the entire trajectory of my life forever. My name is Cameron Foster, and for years, I believed that staying quiet, reliable, and comfortable was enough to hold a life together. 8 years prior, I was working as a mid-level accountant at a firm called Harrison & Associates, earning a modest $65,000 a year. Victoria worked in corporate marketing at an aggressive tech startup, always chasing status, promotions, and the next social tier. When we first met at a friend's barbecue, she told me she loved how dependable and grounded I was, but over time, those exact traits became the very things she held against me. Our marriage started pleasantly enough, with a modest wedding and a small suburban home, but around our 5th anniversary, a cold distance settled between us. Victoria began staying out late, attending high-end networking mixers without me, and openly criticizing my lack of ambition. Whenever I suggested quiet weekend trips or cozy dinners, she dismissed my efforts, accusing me of being content with absolute mediocrity. The end arrived on a random Tuesday evening. I had just finished taking out the trash when Victoria sat me down at the kitchen table with an icy, pre-calculated expression. She demanded a divorce, claiming she deserved a life far grander than the one I could provide. When I quietly asked if another man was involved, her evasive response confirmed everything I feared. His name was Damian Reynolds, a high-flying corporate consultant who drove a luxury Tesla, wore tailored designer suits, and owned a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. During our bitter legal proceedings, Victoria's ruthless lawyer stripped me down to the bare essentials. As they celebrated their clean sweep of my hard-earned assets, her attorney offhandedly remarked that I was young enough to rebuild. What he failed to mention was that Victoria was already building a brand new life with Damian, using the financial foundation I had spent years maintaining. After the judge finalized the dissolution of our marriage, I watched from a window as Damian met Victoria in the parking lot, sweeping her into a cinematic embrace. I stood frozen for 20 minutes, trying to comprehend how completely invisible I had become to someone who had once promised to love me forever. That evening, I moved into an $800 a month studio apartment on Fletcher Street. The air reeked of industrial laundry detergent, the ceiling was covered in unsightly water stains, and my sole possessions consisted of a foldable futon, a plastic card table, and a cheap set of disposable dinnerware. My brother Lucas called to offer his guest room, but I turned him down. I needed to face the harsh, unvarnished reality of my rock bottom alone if I was ever going to pull myself out of it. For the first month, I survived on autopilot, consuming cheap microwave meals and staring blankly at the fading paint on my walls. My performance at work deteriorated so severely that my manager, Patricia, pulled me into her office and ordered me to take a mandatory week off to sort out my personal life. That week turned out to be the ultimate turning point. After 2 days of wallowing in self-pity, something fundamental shifted inside me. The paralyzing sadness dissolved into an intense, searing anger. Anger at Victoria for discarding me like garbage, but more importantly, anger at myself for allowing my life to shrink into irrelevance. Staring into my bathroom mirror, I confronted an out-of-shape, exhausted man with hollow eyes and realized I could no longer tolerate the person staring back at me. That very afternoon, I joined a rugged, no-nonsense gym 2 blocks from my apartment. It was there I met Marcus Blake, a heavily tattooed trainer built like a tank, who instantly recognized the quiet fury in my eyes. Marcus taught me how to channel heartbreak into physical power, forcing me to push past every mental limit I had constructed over the previous decade. I committed to training 6 days a week, transforming physical pain into mental resilience. Simultaneously, I devoured books on business, wealth generation, and entrepreneurial strategy during every spare moment. Inspired by the principle of small, compound actions producing massive long-term results, I realized I had spent my entire adult life thinking small. It was time to rewrite my script entirely. 6 months after my divorce, I formulated a meticulous plan. I decided to launch Foster Financial Consulting, a firm dedicated to providing top-tier financial strategy to struggling small businesses that could not afford corporate giant firms. I spent 40 hours a week at my accounting job and another 40 hours building my client network from my cramped studio apartment. I survived on 4 hours of sleep, running on pure adrenaline and purpose. When I eventually resigned from my stable job, Patricia admitted she barely recognized the sharp, decisive man standing before her. By the end of my first year operating independently, my relentless work ethic had yielded over 25 loyal clients, providing a higher income than my previous salary, while giving me a profound sense of pride and direction. By year 2, my transformation had gathered unstoppable momentum. I hired a full-time administrative assistant named Jennifer, leased an office suite downtown, and expanded my firm's reach. I lost 45 pounds of body fat, gained significant muscle, and completely overhauled my wardrobe and posture. I purchased a clean, modern condominium and bought a vehicle I actually enjoyed driving. More importantly, I completely detached my self-worth from Victoria's opinion. I blocked her on all platforms, erased her from my life, and focused entirely on becoming the strongest version of myself. I was no longer defined by who had abandoned me. I was defined by what I was actively building day after day. 3 years after signing my divorce papers, a prominent client invited me to the Metropolitan Children's Hospital Charity Gala at the Grand Belmore Hotel. It was an exclusive black tie affair filled with city leaders and high-profile executives, dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo with a fresh haircut and absolute quiet confidence. I was engaged in a discussion about commercial expansion with a restaurant owner when I felt a pair of eyes locked onto me from across the ballroom. I turned around to find Victoria standing 20 feet away, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, staring at me as if she had just witnessed a ghost. She looked noticeably older, her polished exterior slightly worn, and her eyes wide with unmitigated shock. As she walked toward me, her expression oscillated between utter confusion, disbelief, and deep fascination. She admitted she almost failed to recognize me, openly admiring my physical shape, my presence, and the sheer authority I projected. When she asked how I managed to attend such an elite gathering, I calmly mentioned I was there with a corporate client. Moments later, Damian Reynolds joined us. Dressed in a sharp suit, Damian took one look at me and instantly recognized my name, praising my firm's growing reputation in the regional business sector. Watching Damian treat me as a respected peer sent a wave of visible discomfort through Victoria. Unable to contain her bewilderment, Victoria pulled me away to a quiet corner of the ballroom. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out, resting her trembling hand on my arm and calling me honey. She asked if I remembered our past, confessing that seeing the man I had become made her realize she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She admitted that despite the glamour and luxury of her new life, she had thrown away the only authentic relationship she had ever known. She openly begged for another chance, insisting that the successful, confident man standing before her was the exact partner she had wanted all along. I looked down at her hand, then up at her face, feeling a total absence of anger, regret, or desire. I gently informed her that the Cameron she once knew had died in that dingy studio apartment above the laundromat, and that the man standing in front of her was built entirely through hardship and discipline. I made it clear that I hadn't transformed for her, or to prove anything to her, but strictly for myself. I reminded her that she was engaged to Damian and urged her to go back to the life she had chosen. I thanked her sincerely, explaining that her ruthless betrayal was the greatest gift I had ever received, as it forced me to break free from mediocrity and discover my true potential. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, leaving her weeping alone in the shadows of the ballroom. The following morning, my assistant informed me that Victoria had called our office, attempting to retain my firm's consulting services. I instructed Jennifer to politely decline the request, closing that chapter permanently. Today, my firm has secured multi-million-dollar contracts. I own a beautiful home, and I am in a healthy, fulfilling relationship with a woman who values me for who I am, rather than what I can provide. Victoria's exit didn't destroy me, it liberated me, proving that losing everything can sometimes be the precise spark required to build an extraordinary life.